I had really high hopes for The Last House, and I have to admit that the movie failed to live up to my expectations. But that being said, it still had a pretty unique premise because this is definitely not your typical post-apocalyptic sci-fi horror flick. Even with all the flaws and loopholes in the plot, I still had to appreciate the tense narrative for what it did deliver. One of the highlights of this film has to be the creepy, otherworldly creatures. I love how the movie waits it out before unleashing these creatures as a potential threat, and we only get a clear look at the creatures towards the end of the film. What are these creatures, and where did they come from? The movie does drop a few hints and suggestions, but nothing is revealed conclusively, which prompts me to explore everything I could find and everything you need to know about this strange Lovecraftian creature in this video. It's going to be a good one, so let's get right into it. How is the creature revealed in the movie? The trailer hinted at the presence of some terrifying creature in the movie, so it wasn't really unexpected. The Last House follows the Delgado family as they encounter a crisis following a violent thunderstorm and heavy rain in a small seaside town. Things start off rather innocuously before the family of four discovers that they cannot leave the house because every door and window has been sealed by some invisible force. This has affected the entire neighborhood and everybody is trapped in their homes. Days turn to weeks and weeks turn to months, but the captivity continues and it soon becomes a struggle for resources and survival. However, another threat is saved for later when the family discovers the presence of a strange, gigantic creature that appears along with the rain. The little girl Ruth had hinted at something along these lines before, but earlier, her parents and elder brother didn't pay much attention to her claims. One day, they see an unknown woman outside begging for help before she was dragged away by an unseen creature. They realize they have to be quiet while in hiding, and they choose to cover the windows during the rain to avoid detection. However, staying safe with such an unexplained threat outside turns out to be easier said than done. One day, a momentary lapse in their disciplined routine makes one of the creatures take notice, and it manages to enter their house. The Delgado family remains in hiding, but the creature ruins the garden and water supply, two crucial elements keeping them alive as they remain shut inside. After Ruth is bitten by a ferret, her mother creeps through the sewers to get her medicine from a neighbor's house, and she gets attacked by one of these creatures that chases her back to her house. Ruth's father, Jason, is quick to dump an entire wall on the sewer holes to keep it contained once his wife is safely back, but time is running out for them. Eventually, desperation drives the family to the unthinkable. They lay a trap for the creature in order to risk everything for an opportunity to escape. They would use the tiny window of opportunity when the creature comes in to leave the house, because staying in is like a death sentence. What surprised me the most was the nature of the creatures, which is very different from what I had assumed, so let's take a look at that next. What are these mystery creatures? I'm a pretty big fan of H.P. Lovecraft and Call of Cthulhu, so I've taken the liberty of calling these Lovecraftian creatures because they somewhat resemble Cthulhu. But in the movie, they're honestly just some kind of sea creature that is probably amphibious because they're pretty comfortable on land as well as in water. Initially, I had assumed that the creatures had to be extraterrestrial because everything that was happening, from the frequent strange rain to the doors being locked by some external force, seemed alien. However, director Louis Leterrier had other ideas when it came to the creature. He explained that they're ancient ocean dwellers that have lived on Earth for much longer than humanity has existed. In his words, we're living on their planet. The creatures emerged from the depths of the ocean after the humans abused the environment enough to raise global temperatures, which in turn increased the temperature of the ocean as well. This possibility is intriguing because most of the ocean and the deep trenches underwater remain unexplored even today, and it's easy to imagine these gigantic creatures living there before they were forced by circumstances to come out on land. The whole idea behind the creature was to make it mysterious, and what better way than to make it stand on tentacles. The creatures we see in the film are massive, and they're almost too fluid and flexible as they move around on their tentacles. The mystery surrounding the monster is supposed to help the viewer imagine the gaps that we don't get to see and figure it out for themselves. Why do they attack the humans and the world as we know it? As I mentioned, these creatures have lived on Earth since long before humanity's rise, so it's basically their world that we're just living in. The changes to the environment and the ecological damage is what prompted them to emerge, and they immediately viewed the humans as a threat. Eliminating humans would restore the balance that had been lost, and it did because within a few years, greenery and wildlife returned to its intended levels. I don't think that the creatures see themselves as invading humanity. It's more like they're defending themselves and eliminating humans for being hostile toward them and their planet. The moment Ruth convinces her father not to kill the creature, it allows the family to escape without harming them back, which suggests that they're not hostile if they don't have to be for survival. A part of the Lovecraftian Old Ones. Every horror fan probably knows about the Great Old Ones, which are these ancient, godlike beings that continue to exist and spell doom for humanity when their boundaries are breached. We mentioned how these creatures resemble Cthulhu, and they have a lot of similarities with the other Old Ones as well. Their tentacles, aquatic origins, age, and extreme intelligence all come from the central themes of Lovecraft, that humanity isn't the highest or the most important form of life out there, and there might be greater forces in the cosmos. This also fits into the description of the creatures we see in the movie because they have no human sense of morality, and even their intelligence or advancement is of a very different kind. The ocean as an ancient consciousness. This is probably stretching things a bit, but we know there are various cultures across the world that consider nature to be a sentient being. In that case, it could be that the severe environmental degradation has summoned nature to emerge in this form to set the balance straight. The creatures could also be an immune response from the Earth itself, where humans are considered a deadly virus that needs to be exterminated. This would also explain certain powers these creatures have that have no natural explanation. Once again, this would push the film further into Lovecraft's concept of incomprehensible entities whose bodies and minds cannot be understood through human standards of normalcy. Are these creatures intelligent? Why do they let the Delgado family leave? These creatures are definitely intelligent, even though, like I said, they don't have what we would call conventional human intelligence. They're smart enough to sense that humans are trouble for the Earth, and they know that they need to be eliminated. For this, they pick the most convenient method to have them killed, as the creatures keep humans locked up in their houses, waiting for them to die. They're not aggressive by nature, which is evident from the way they interact with Ruth from the beginning. There's a chance that the creature that Ruth sensed as a child was simply trying to communicate with her, but she never understood. Later, when the creature realizes that the family is capable of compassion, as they don't kill the trapped creature, it opens the door for them and also signals all the other creatures to retreat back into the sea. This is probably because the world is now safe enough for them to head back to their natural habitat, and the remaining humans are too few to cause any damage for the next 1,000 years or so. The Delgado family shows that they can peacefully coexist with these creatures, and this becomes their salvation as the creature deems them fit to live in this new world. These are signs of great intelligence and wisdom, proving these aren't your regular sci-fi horror creatures that are simply out for blood. Exploring the anatomy and powers of these creatures. Do they have weather-controlling powers? The creatures literally look like my worst nightmare dressed in black as the hideous tentacled things show up unexpectedly. They move around on their tentacles and it doesn't look like they have a proper skeletal structure. They have really strong muscles which allow them to stand and walk around, but these same muscular tentacles can also be useful while swimming underwater, just like a giant octopus. Their size is almost twice that of a regular human, but the flexibility and fluid nature of their body allows them to move through impossible spaces. There's a chance that these creatures have heightened senses, but we haven't got too many examples of that just yet. They do charge and attack when they feel threatened, and the stranger from earlier that the Delgado family watched being taken by a creature had a big dagger in her hand. Ruth had no weapon at all and showed humanity, which is probably why they allowed her to survive. As for powers, the creatures are freakishly strong and humans are simply no match for them. They seem to heal from even fatal injuries quite easily, and they usually come alongside non-stop rainfall, which brings me to their most important power. It seems as though they can control the weather, which is probably because they've existed for so long, bonding themselves with nature and the planet in inextricable ways. They summon the rain as a cover to traverse the surface, because even though they're amphibians and comfortable on the ground, it's probably better if water is raining down on them. Also, as a part of their power, they can manipulate the rain into something else entirely that changes the molecular structure of the doors and windows to seal them into impenetrable structures. Even drill machines couldn't get through them, so clearly, the creatures have such a thorough understanding of nature that they can change the structure of things as well as bring about changes in the weather. What makes Ruth understand the creatures so well? It's actually the little girl who first deduces that there's some creature out there and it's not exactly hostile and means no harm. Of course, this wasn't taken into account by the adults, but her innocence sensed something that her smart engineer father couldn't. I would say this has something to do with the innocence that's associated with children. Even when she encounters the creatures as a young teenager, she's still not corrupted by the evils of the outside world because she stayed in for a majority of her formative years. Her parents are busy protecting the family and worrying about their children, but the child in Ruth is still pure and doesn't suspect malice just because a creature looks different from what she's used to. As it turns out, that's precisely what the creatures seek as well, because the sign of compassion from humanity is what makes them forgive the Delgado family, let them live to see another day. Practical effects to the rescue. This is the reason why the creatures look elegant and natural instead of like CGI monsters that don't quite strike the right chord. The director envisioned the creature as an entity that's nearly fluid, like a dancer that resembles two legs in flowing rain. That's pretty specific. So instead of going the CGI route, the harder choice was made, and the production created a practical silicone creature that could be filmed inside the house. This wasn't really a mansion we're talking about, so the heavy suit had to be flexible enough to move easily through the cramped rooms with a puppeteer inside. Even the submersion scenes later in the movie are filmed in real submersion stations, which is quite something for a film crew. Maybe that's why it feels so realistic, and even if the movie does disappoint, the creatures surely don't. Will the creatures be explored further in the sequel? Well, in all likelihood, yeah, because the director is quite optimistic about continuing the story. You can see that from how the movie ends, and he doesn't hide his intentions during interviews. The film ends with the suggestion that there are other survivors out there, and right before the credits, you can hear someone on the radio respond with a hello when Ruth asks if there are any survivors out there. We'll probably get to see the fate of this apocalyptic world, and in that case, the creatures might be present in that film as well. However, now that it's been established that these creatures aren't essentially evil, perhaps we'll see them in some other capacity. As we've seen in so many other apocalyptic movies, the real threat is often the other survivors. Maybe the sequel will dwell on that idea and continue the narrative centered around the Delgado family as they explore this new world. Now, I know I'm a sucker for creature features, but this one is a one-time watch at best. There are just way too many inconsistencies, and even with a stellar cast, it just wasn't the memorable experience I expected. As for the creatures, however, there's no disappointment there because they look absolutely terrific on screen. Also, their role in the story is extremely important, and in a way, these misunderstood creatures aren't even the real threat. Someone once said there's no greater threat on Earth than humans, and I guess this movie just drives that point home. Let us know in the comments down below what you thought of The Last House and the mysterious creatures that take over the planet. Also, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button to see a lot more of this kind of stuff.